Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of What the Tech is Product Management. We have Aishwarya Ashok. She is a podcast host for Foyer. Beyond that, she's also PM at Zoho. But before we go deep down, let's do a quick round of intros. I'm Nishant. I'm at Walmart. I do product management in the ad tech space. Shruti?
Hey everyone, I'm a product manager at Snowflake and I work on the snow side experience side of the house. Aishwarya, do you want to go next?
Yes, thanks for that quick intro. Hey, folks, this is Aishwarya. I am also into product management, so I've been into building products for the last few years now. And I also enjoy meeting fellow product folks and founders, which I do on the podcast that Nishant mentioned called the Founders Foyer. And let's talk more about that as we go through the podcast. Amit,
Awesome.
thanks for having me.
For sure. All right. So first off, how do you think about like a PM career, Aishwarya? Just help us understand like how did podcasting fit into your larger story?
So I started off like any other engineering grad. It was like getting your engineering done and then thinking about what would the future path be like. And for me, I was clear about one thing is that I wanted to do something different in the product space. But back then, I didn't know that there was something called product. There was something called B2B, SaaS. All of these terms were like really buzzwords when I finished my engineering in 2016. But thankfully, I was talking to a few seniors and they were telling me that, hey, there's this thing called product marketing, and that side of things would involve the skills that you really are passionate about, which is how do you do the positioning narrative around a product? And you like tech, you like writing, you like speaking, so you really want to think about. So that was my first entry into the product world in 2016 when I took up a job in product marketing without really knowing what B2B SaaS and product marketing was. But I think that turned out to be a great learning exposure for me because it was the first time you are exposed to a space that not only involves building products, but it's also like you talk to a lot of these customers, you meet
Yeah.
and cross collaborate with a lot of these domains. So since I had already had this kind of a customer connect, and I knew that this module actually involved some core pieces that still need to be shipped, I thought like why not take this up and why not work with the engineering team on getting this done. And
Sure.
I never knew what product management was. I never knew this was probably the entry into product management, but it was mostly like, hey, I know that this is a need and I've seen customers asking for this and I kind of understand what we have to do. So like let's use this time and space to come up with this kind of a understanding this is the right problem to solve, and also like really coming up with ways to solve for it. And I often tell people that sometimes you do projects or you do things even before you start the roles. That kind of gives you that leverage to really understand what motivates you towards that role. Like what is really about product building that you're interested about. And that was my entry into product management as a career. And that was like about 4 years ago. So 2020, I moved on to building products. Post then built something 0 to 1, and currently working with um, a growth stage kind of a problem involving hardware and software. But yeah, the long story short is started off with product marketing, understood the intricacies of what actually gets involved in building and shipping a product. And I think you also asked this question about the podcasting part, right? So the podcasting was like I would say like a sub product in terms of my career product, because the first podcast that I hosted was with two other friends that I had in the product space, Srinidhi and Padmini. When podcasting was just up and running in India, I would say like in like late 2018, early 2019 times. So when we started off with that. And for me, it was like, I guess, somewhere I started productizing podcasts because I started liking the whole PMing around doing podcasts. So started to do something of my own called the Founders Foyer. But I think, yeah, like 5, 6 years now into podcasting, it's definitely been interesting.
So, how, Ashwarya, you kind of touched upon like, you started leading by through a project and, just like slowly maneuvering the product management world. So you understood the intricacies, and then your mentors recognized that you had certain skill sets which would make you a fine product manager. But how did you officially make the ask? Like I talk to a lot of people who are in engineering
Hmm.
or MM, and they're like, I think I have some of those skill set. I know I've executed, but like I don't know how to, like whom do I talk to? How do I make that official transition? So how did it work out for you?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So I think in this case, you rightly pointed out a piece of the answer, right? Which is you've already done that. So how do I show it? So in this case, I think it's largely once again coming to the concept of how do you build a narrative around what you've done. I often think about reflecting on my journey and reflecting on people's journey as well. Um, Instead of looking at it more like I won that role and I think I'm great for the product management role. The small change in belief would be like, hey, do I have the product mindset? Do I have the mindset that it takes to get me into the role? And when you look at it as a mindset, you would naturally want to start adopting things, doing things even before you're given the role, right? Like, let's say I have this person I really look up to in my company, and I know that working with them is really going to help me. Instead of just going to go and tell them that, hey, I would really be a value fit to your team, and I would love to work with you. That's great. I mean, like they would, if they know you, they would, be very happy about, okay, like, yeah, come and join. But then what would actually be the moving point for them is to be able to see your work. And for that, you don't officially, would have to get to their team to be able to understand and jot out a few things that could actually give them the leverage that they, the product and you actually know the job even if you're on the job. So that starts with very, very simple things like even writing down something that you see as a potential challenge for the team, or um, doing teardowns. I mean, like people talk a lot about teardowns. I mean, at the end of the day, like you do teardowns for 10 different external products. If you really want to like understand and move to an internal, team, it would be a great journey to start understanding what is that particular team solving for, and really value adding even before you could move the team. And I look at this when you start looking at it as a mindset, it's really conveyed in the way you speak, and it comes out more as you're not chasing the role, but you're like genuinely, caring about building a great product and building it with a good set of teammates who are equally passionate like you.
That's nice. That's nice. No, glad to hear all the journey and how you stepped into product management. Nishant, do you want to ask the questions?
Yeah. And before we go there, like I also appreciate the details, Aishwarya, because a lot of times we gloss over things and it might
Mm,
not make as much sense to people who are not on the product side, right? Uh, and having been into product marketing and product management, it was very similar, surprisingly, where I thought, okay, here is what I know, and here is what I know that I don't know. And there are things
right.
that I don't
Exactly.
know at all, anything at all, right? But
That's it.
having that lens of, okay, here are my strengths and here are my gaps, gave me opportunities to position my story effectively. Because people are going to be
Mm,
like, you might believe that you're a great product builder, manager, mindset person, but to have that narrative of, okay, here is the focus that I can get you. Here are experiences around it that I already have built over the year. And here are the things that I would want to learn, I'm passionate about. And here is how I have been trying to learn by myself, right? So giving someone the confidence that you will excel involves your current experiences and current passions and acknowledgement of the gaps that you have in mind. Having
exactly.
those candid conversations as you make the transition, I think is super critical. And thank you for sharing those
Absolutely.
specific details. Appreciate it.
Yeah. I'll just add to
No,
that, right? Even if you are a PM and you're switching from one team to another or you're building the next product, you always will have gaps. So I
Yeah.
think part of being a product manager or having a product mindset is to be okay with not knowing things.
absolutely. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. So you did gloss upon your podcast journey, and you get to meet some amazing folks along the way, right? What are some of your important learnings, and how did you apply that to your career?
Right. Yeah. So, like I was just talking about the way it all started in, late 2018, early 2019. When we sat down with people, we started like really falling in love with the candidness that folks got into the podcast, because we would tend to have like a certain story of them on our heads where we would think, okay, yeah, they kind of made it, they crushed it, and this is how things are. But when they actually get to you in the conversation, it gets to be like this very sofa style kind of a conversation where they're just like, don't worry, like I've been there, I've done that, and like I this is not dumb. It's absolutely okay. And like, I've had the same questions as you do. So that part of podcasting, I think, really kept us going forward, which is why we did like season 1, season 2 of the podcast. And of course, after that, we had a small hiatus in between because the three of us who were running the podcast had like different priorities. And that was also the time that I was building something 0 to 1 at work. And I was also this curious person who was trying to do some of side projects, like building some no code apps and all that. And I was thinking that, okay, hey, we have podcasts helping people transition into product careers, or the fantastic one that you both are doing now, which is again like helping people understand about product management or product thinking. And there's the other extreme, which is going to talk about scaling products, scaling companies, something like Masters of Scale, which is again like operations and business part. There was like a gray area in between, which is more like, hey, I just have this idea. It's very zero, it's very -1. I just want to build this out. How do I do it? Like the creating side of things was still the middle gray area that I saw, which didn't have much of content, which didn't have much of a voice. That's where I started the Founders Foyer in 2022. And it got picked up as a part of the LinkedIn Creators Program. So somewhere it gave me a consistency to keep going with the project. But as I was talking to these founders, so initially I started off with product folks that I knew from the circles, from LinkedIn, from whom I've seen and I've like really looked upon, and I know that they add like a very good peer thinking angle to building products.
Okay.
And eventually, what happened was I saw that there was a pattern being built in the podcast, which is the way that I found people and the kind of folks who spoke on the show always brought in this broad spectrum of interests, which had like a very deeper intersection with what they do in tech. By which I mean like folks who are there in product, but who also have a background, let's say, in psychology, or who tend to bring their experiences from, let's say, a completely different space, such as neuroscience, but who are still building out in tech. Somebody who's currently running like a humor business, who's a stand up comedian, but she's built communities for creators and she's worked with tech folks. Somebody who's probably like doing research with AI and tech, but who's also like writing books on the side for teens, and it's like a science fiction books. So I was like, okay, wait, there is a sort of broader range that I saw in folks who brought about these concepts, and I thought that okay, so literally the fact that they were able to add that clarity in thinking and being able to give a very very different perspective to the kind of questions we have about around building stuff was only because of that amalgamation. They were able to like navigate different spaces and they brought those different experiences together. I think everybody that I spoke to had this sort of intersection that they really brought into their work, which showed up in different phases of them explaining how they did things. So the core motive still remained the same in terms of helping people navigate that 0 to 1ness of shipping something. But a lot of people who were listening to these conversations came up to say, hey, like I've never seen this person at all. And it's like this great guest. And I would otherwise not be able to sit down and know about their work or like understand this different perspective they're giving. And my God, like I didn't know writing, fiction, tech, and all could have this intersection. So then I understood that, okay, so that becomes the leverage for the show or for the theme as such, is that you want people to think differently. Like you I mean, like when we think about startup stuff, and like everybody knows what product market fit is all about, and you don't want yet another, like a definition on what product market fit stands for. But can somebody talk about it from a very different lens? Yes, because they've probably addressed the same thing in a very different setup, in a very very different um surrounding scenario, and that brings in a story, and that's a story that you want to capture.
That is so fascinating, actually, to think about all the different lenses you're able to bring to the podcast. One podcast that I really love, I think the best so far that I've gone through, was the Knowledge Project by Shane Paris. And he keeps talking about
Absolutely.
the mental model. And I think that's somehow connected to what you're doing. So, depending on where you come from, you would be looking at the same problem with so many lenses. And having
Yeah.
that neuroscience or like a science fiction lens might be like opening up new ways of solving the problem in the first place, right? So really exciting.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
also a part of
Thanks.
personality, right? Like even as a PM, when you look at problem, like I've seen so many PM look at same problem with different angle. Like
yeah,
Oh,
I know
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
when I'm in conversations, I'm known for a very high EQ. So, I'm one of those person who's trying to really understand what the engineer is thinking and, why probably that engineer is revolting and why that PM director is revolting. And I'm trying to
Right.
figure out, hey, can we, like what is the core agenda, right? And like every PM, like I've seen someone who's like chop, 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 like this is how we do, right? Like, and this just, I think similar thing, right? Like the mental models are really necessary, how you navigate.
Very true.
I
Yeah.
actually know
Very true.
a,
And
oh no, I was going to say, I actually know a magician, Alam from UNC, and he is into product
okay.
management. And I was always curious,
Oh
like,
wow.
his leadership calls. It's like, okay, here is the magic. Now give me the funding for this feature. That's it.
I really want to connect with this person. This sounds fascinating. My God. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
And see, these are the spheres, right? Like, for me, I found that fascinating as well. And what's your right? I think with respect to the mental models and like, by the way, I'm a huge fan of the Knowledge Project as well. And Shane is absolutely amazing with respect to bringing in this kind of the same broad spectrum that I was talking about, but more, I think, from the mental models perspective and very broadly a very non-tech kind of a thing. But
Yeah.
I think, yeah, the same thing into tech can work wonders. And like Shruti was saying, we have different personalities. And to me, I think I've always believed in the fact that as more so as product people, but in general, as people in tech, we tend to have very fluid personalities. And it's more so because when you have it fluid is when you're able to like easily navigate and try to apply different kinds of thinking into different areas that would require, because if you start associating yourself too closely with a singular identity, I think it gets very tricky in terms of dealing with a situation, a problem, a challenge. And it also sort of buckets you into thinking that, oh, like, oh, maybe, yeah, I'm not that kind of a person, so I don't think this is going to come to me. Or maybe I am this kind of a person, so I'm going to be involved only with. So those kind of change the stories that you tell to yourself, and you start stemming your own growth by doing
Yeah.
it to yourself. So I think, yeah, when you start approaching it more like applying different personalities, I think that's a great way to start.
And I think that is the true definition of diversity as well, right? Like we think genders and like, different factors,
Yeah.
like different personality is actually what, is necessary for
True.
me to function. Yeah.
Shruti, you want to go to the next one?
Yes. So I think we talked a little bit about your podcast, Aishwarya, but we wanted to touch upon like, how do you define building connections and, like how has it helped you? Like you touched upon that you've learned so much through the journey, but like, as a PM, as day-to-day PM, how has this helped
Mm.
you? How have you gone about building these connections?
Right. um yeah, so I think the way I currently at least see connections is how you're able to share stories, right? Because at the end of the day, um, connections is more about people, and people are more about the stories that they bring forward. I think when it definitely came to trying to understand how do you get to know people who are not from your circles, I think that's when people started terming it as networks, because they were like, oh, like go build on your network. And I think this we would have heard a lot growing up when we were in college, when we were trying to enter into a career. Even now, when as PMs we talk to other people, it's like, hey, go build out
Or
a network. And
they
yeah,
unfortunately networking and it's like, yeah,
yeah,
like some people are very
yeah,
good with like, talking to people, building connections, and like some people just don't want to do that. But like there is a way to go around things. Yeah.
right, right, exactly. So I think for me that of course when you hear this networking, and when you first start understanding what networking really means, it's great, and you think that, okay, I'm just going to go meet 10 people, get this done, like just befriend them or whatever it is, like get to know people. But I think eventually my idea around this networking completely transformed, because the more I started understanding that it is about building connections and not growing the network, I think the way you start meeting with people, engaging with people also changes. Because with respect to networking, and especially now, if somebody tells me like, hey, I'm here because I want to network, it puts you off, because first of all, with networking, what happens is this whole thing becomes very transactional, right? Like the fact that you think, okay, let's say if there's this event coming up and you really want to go there, the purpose of you going there is definitely to meet somebody, or like just see what's happening around. But the term that you give to yourself is more like, hey, I'm going to go there and network. But I would say that's going to like limit your perspective around what you really are going there for, or what's the purpose around it. Because the minute you would term it as networking, you're not only putting a one-to-one kind of a, hey, like I'm going to talk to this person because he or she is going to like, match this sort of criteria list that I already have, which is like, okay, are they a PM? Are they a designer? Check, check, check. Okay, yeah, then I think it would be great. And then there's this whole pull out of, hey, are you on Twitter? Are you on LinkedIn? And like, tada, like you connect and people may like, I made 10 connections today or made 12 connections today. But I guess, like that's not what building connection would really look like because first off, I think treating it transactionally is also going to limit you from really understanding the story of this person. Like if you go to a meetup of like, let's say 20 people, 25 people, even if you come back with a story of like, let's say having spoken to two or three folks and like something that really changed your perspective or something that you come back with in terms of reflection, I think to me that is valued more as building a connection than actually having to make those the social connections with those 10, 12 requests or invites that you've had. And this is primarily so because what we really mean by building connection is to be able to have that shared context of hey, this is what excites you and this is what excites me, and you have this passing of story. It's like how we used to play current pass, and there's like literally like like you get excited. And so when you make connections, it's more about understanding their stories, understanding what excites them, what with them. That was a huge, I would say, benefit, not just in terms of podcasts, which I largely do for the podcast, but also in meeting fellow people as PM from the product space, from meeting genuine people. Because now what happens, you are cherry picking your community and you are basically like trying to make, um, like this close circle around you, not engineered for you, but you are trying to understand what is really motivating you, and you are basically like curating this close circle of friends. And I completely get your perspective, Shruti, where you said like, there are some people who would really not want to do that, or like let's say they would want to do that and they would still think that, hey, I'm not great at it. And to be very honest, like whatever, like in terms of let's say it's through a DM, it's through a physical meeting that you do. All of these are just mediums at the end of the day to connect with folks, because it necessarily doesn't have to be that, hey, I suck at cold DM, I really don't want to do. Okay, yeah, don't do. If it's not your kind of a thing, you don't have to like force it on yourself. But just figure out that pathway that could lead you to making a good connection, which is like, let's say if you're somebody who loves going on hackathons or somebody who loves building stuff, I think there's a tribe that you can find by just being able to share your perspective. So
I actually
that's
want
the
to
way I started
chime in
looking at
here
connection.
very quickly because I want to say that you're a true believer of this in the sense that when we reached out to you about a year ago, not knowing how to really operationalize this thing, and you were gracious enough to one share this knowledge, and then I think I came back to you again a couple of times later on, and you would still be doing it, and now you are on our podcast. You know, someone might be thinking, "Oh, we're competitors, right?" But end of the day, the pie is large enough, and thanks so much for like sharing that perspective on connections. First of all, because we all, at least when I was doing my MBA, one of the things that I would dread is this socials and networking. And I'm like, okay, every time I go into the room, there are 10 people talking to one person, and I'm like, I'm not able to make sense of how will 11% add value to that conversation. And it would be so many ideas at the same time. And I feel like in your conversation, you represented two people at the same time. One is the introverts out there who might be like, okay, I prefer a certain medium of connection
Yeah.
and I would prefer quality over quantity. And the other person
Exactly.
that you actually represented is the 90s kids by talking about current part. Probably a lot of folks wouldn't understand, but no, thanks for sharing all of that. Shruti, did you want to add something?
No, I think like whenever I'll just put it out there, right? Like I'm also, a lot of us are introverted, extroverted, or like a mix of personality, like you
Yeah.
have, right, Ashwarya? And like every time I go to networking events, like people are glossing over, and like the way this is my take on things is like hang out with a couple of people, read about them, and just like I think the takeaway that you want to do is like share your perspective and get their core perspective. And even if it results in like a lot of times, like I've attended networking events where it has resulted in us not agreeing on something, but it actually
Correct.
helps you get the other perspective, and that makes you feel that you're not just superficial, you're actually going down and unpeeling the
True.
layers, and sometimes it can be applicable. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that, and Nishant, lead
No,
with it.
I've done
No,
both
I
actually. And no, so actually, I was going to say there were times when I was in the product marketing world. And for me at that
mm,
point, there was the different mindset. It was like, I
Right.
didn't know much about their world. I had to find a way to quickly connect with as many number of people and filtering out and then saying, okay, I like these people. So now I'll have more better connection with them. And sometimes it wouldn't work because they were like, oh, the first time you treated me shit, right? Like I was one of your 100 connection and now you want to do well by me. Like it may not work, but there has to be balance. End of the day,
Right.
trying to connect meaningfully is such a powerful concept. I don't think I have explicitly thought about it this well. So thanks for laying that seed in my brain.
No, I completely agree with both of you, and I think the genuine part of the connections, right? Like, and especially so that once you find the path that works for you, which is like, let's say you are somebody who would love to connect with somebody through thoughtful message, and more so in my case, that happened where I enjoy leaving people messages when I find something interesting, especially if I find like a piece of work of theirs that is a blog, is a tweet, or whatever it is. You come across something, and the best way to like get to know somebody is to be able to express what how it moved you, or how basically something was something that was like really impacting you. And like you said, Nishant, where we met this way, and we happened to like build our relationship over the next few months, where we were able to exchange our thoughts and ideas. And this is exactly like the way that connections would start spreading around, and connections would start making more meaning and depth, because then there's a shared context, there's a shared narrative, and you are at the helm of defining what that narrative has to be. And both sides, by you I mean like you and the person that you are connecting with.
Awesome. No, thanks so much for again dwelling on this idea. Uh, yeah. No. Building connections is like a deep topic. We can go on and on. It was making me think of a few things. Like earlier, you were talking about how there mental models and diversity, right? Because the connection might feel irrelevant in a given moment, because oh,
Exactly.
it's not directly connected to where I'm headed. But when you give that chance to be spontaneous and allow for serendipity, that same contact might add value in the way you think, or like just another connection that might end up in your
Very true.
work at some point, right?
No, absolutely. In fact, the science fiction author that I was telling you, who also is a researcher with AI stuff, her name is Abigail Hingwen. And I chanced upon Abigail through another person that I really look up to in the product space called Deborah Liu. And I read Deb's book about, uh, leadership and 10 rules for women at work. And one of the stories was about Abigail, who actually went on to follow her interests and sort of bring that amalgamation together. And I was just fascinated, and I just put up a story for her saying, "Hey, Abigail, like you're doing great." And I was like really moved by a story. And she responded back saying, like, "Oh, like I never knew it connected with you." And we were just having this Instagram DM. I'm not even kidding. It was on Instagram. And we were like just chatting, like telling each other that, hey, this is great. There was like a 2 month hiatus. And then there was again something else that both of us sparked on. And then there was a very, again, like a 1 2 minute conversation. And then another month went on. And that's the time that I figured out that, hey, you know what? Like, I saw that there was like a book launch that she was doing. And I was thinking that, hey, you know what? Like, it would now make sense for me to like bring her up on the show, because, like I've really understood what her motivations, or like what kind of a perspective can she bring to. And also the fact that it hit me only later and not at the beginning. Like, had I just reached out to her saying that, hey, I would love to have you on the podcast, it would have been more like a like, I mean, it would still be a good cold email, but not the shared perspective that I would have after having like these couple of conversations with her, and then like having to approach it. So yeah, that was the other example that I could think of in terms of like when you said like something can come up later and you
Yeah.
wouldn't know.
Well, that's amazing. Thanks so much for sharing because it's also a cue for our own research purposes, right? Like, how do we find a next speaker? We always
Yes,
be curious about, okay, how can we bring unique insight? It comes with understanding people at a deeper level. But I know we're at the top of the
absolutely.
Sorry, I was gonna say, like, I mean, we want to be respectful of your time, especially you're like in India late night.
Mhm.
But more in terms of the kind of people that you have met so far, what is one takeaway that you would remember that you think people in product management or otherwise should be learning from? It a very
Right.
one and probably broad also. So yeah, take your time.
Right. No. No, I think the greatest for me, at least personally, and also something that I started observing with the guests on the show was this whole phrase. By the way, was something that I picked up from a fellow product person, Peter Yang, when I like have these chats with him. That he framed it very nicely, called operating at your zone of genius. It's like trying to really understand what motivates you and why does this make you unique in kind of what you do. And that only comes when you start analyzing or understanding what is it that you are able to do, and what is it that makes you like bring about a very different perspective to both yourself and the kind of audience that you work with. So for me, I think when people ask me that, hey, with the podcast, you're able to like bring in very different perspectives. Like you're somebody who loves this intersection concept. You're talking about how can you, and for me, when I say intersection, it's about how I bring in art, music, how I bring in something from tech, or all of these together into product. Like there have been days that I felt something that I did in art actually came back to help me in product. And I would still sit and think about how the hell am I drawing these inspiration? Like, why is it that's like doing something in art is actually giving me a product idea? I'm still not able to figure that out. But I do understand that it's sometimes because you're operating at a way that your mind works and you genuinely like try to draw in those influences and those interests together. And that's going to work very, very differently for each person, right? Like for Nishant, it's going to be a very different skill set. For Shruti, is going to be like a very different set of things. But the minute you start connecting those dots and like, bringing in those intersections and like trying to say, oh, this pattern is drawn at this dimension, like intersecting with these couple of skills. And this is why it makes it more like I'm unique in this, or this is how it makes it more purposeful. I think that really gets you to at least take the next decade of the journey forward, whether it's for building product or any other side project that you would want to do. So for me, that was the biggest learning.
And that's
Amazing.
amazing. That's amazing to know, Ashwarya. I mean, you're so much to share that we could go beyond, but like we want to be respectful of your time, and probably we would love to do another episode as well. This has been a great learning for me and Nishan to be connected with you, and like to do this podcast was an honor. But yeah, that's pretty much all that we wanted to capture in this podcast. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm very sure our viewers are going to love your journey into management and around podcasts and everything that you do. Awesomely. Nishant, any parting comments?
No, I mean, thank you so much for joining, Aishwarya. I know, like, with everything that you do for Founders Power, the amount of quality that you have, the frequency that you post podcasts where it's all an inspiration to us. But at the same time, we understand what it takes for you to be on this podcast. So really appreciate your time and all the help to the last few months. And hopefully there'll be like more meaningful connections, and maybe we can get the
Absolutely.
relation both onto your podcast and our podcast. Okay.
I don't know. I'd love both of that.
Okay.
And no, this is a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, both of you. And I think for me, like generally getting to know both of you, like how we were chatting on the podcast beforehand, and then having those stories, and then coming into the podcast has definitely helped in getting to know more about what drives both of you in both product and podcasting space. And I hope the listeners also like enjoy this kind of a topic that we were talking about. But yeah, I feel honored. So thank you so much for bringing me on. And like I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. So thanks.
Thank
Amazing.